Hey everyone, welcome to Princess Gay. I'm your host Connie, and today we are here with But I'm a Cheerleader. This is a donation reward movie for Isabel, so thank you as always. And I don't know really anything about this. I don't know what it's about. I didn't read the description of the video specifically to avoid that. But this is a movie, and it's about just under an hour and a half long. That's what I know. I've seen multiple different types of movies that are based around cheerleading or the sort. Um, I assume this is something more. I have to assume that this has to be something more. It just seems like that's a really simplistic title, and it also seems like just based on the title, it almost seems like almost satirical in a way. Like the idea, like the title is "But I'm a Cheerleader." It sounds like you're saying that in defense. It's like I can't do something bad. I'm a cheerleader, or well, it'd be rather, "But I'm a cheerleader. I can't do something bad." Something like that. That's the kind of vibes it brings out to me. So it could be satirical. It could be something like that. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I've never heard of this movie before it was recommended, before it was requested, so I know nothing about it. I don't know who's in this. I don't know what it's about. I don't know anything about it, so we're going in completely blind. But I'm definitely, I guess, interested. I guess we'll see. Specifically because the title does give me those vibes that it's not going to be as straightforward as just another cheerleader movie. But let's find out. So, when the screen fades to black, pause this redirect and go to the description below. Follow the link to the reaction, and after you watch it, come back here to the redirect and resume play. Because after it fades to black and then fades back in, everything from that point forward will be my afterthoughts and will contain spoilers to the movie. So, that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you at the reaction. And we are back, and we'll begin with spoilers in 3, 2, 1, now. So, this was a really happy movie in terms of the ending and in terms of the message and everything. And I was looking some stuff up afterwards to see, like, how much, I guess you could say, personal accuracy was put into this from the director and everything, from like all the people who were in it. And the director, Jamie Babbitt, this is her first move. This was her first movie, by the way. Is queer. She has a form. She is divorced from her ex-wife now, who she worked on this movie with. And there is a lot of personal story to this. So this is based on basically two separate things. Babbitt based it on a halfway house that her mother runs called New Directions, that is for drug and alcohol problems. But it also came to fruition after she read an article about conversion therapy and about a guy who came back from it with a lot of self-hatred. She combined these two ideas to create this film and just made a story out of it, basically. Her and her, at the time, girlfriend wanted the main character to be a cheerleader, according to this, because it is the quote-unquote pinnacle of the American dream and the American dream of femininity. And she says she wanted the film to represent the lesbian experience from the femme perspective, which it definitely does, contrasting a lot of the films at the time that represented the lesbian experience from the butch perspective. She also wanted to satirize both the religious right and the gay community, which is definitely done here. But she also felt she wasn't completely qualified to write the script herself, and so she brought in Brian Wayne Peterson to help her with that. Um, Brian Wayne Peterson, for those who don't know, alongside his writing partner Kelly Soters, wrote and produced Smallville, among other things, such as, according to this, Beauty and the Beast, Salem, and stuff like that. So that's really interesting in and of itself. Brian Wayne Peterson also had experience with conversion therapy while working at a prison clinic for sex offenders, apparently, according to what this says. He has said that he wanted to make a film that would not only entertain people, but also anger them and encourage them to talk about the issues it raised, which this film, I think, succeeds at. There's also, let me see here, there's something else I wanted to look at here. I think it's at the top. Yes. The costume and set design of the film highlighted the themes of gender roles and the social construction of gender roles and heteronormativity by using like these artificial textures, intense blues and pinks, which I pointed out. I pointed out how like sterilized everything looked and all, especially like Mary's character. I made note of that. It's very noticeable. And apparently, this was originally rated by the MPAA as NC-17, but because of cuts that Babbitt made, it allowed it to be re-rated as R. And when interviewed in the documentary This Film Is Not Yet Rated, Babbitt criticized the MPAA for discriminating against films with homosexual content. Basically, it was rated as such because of the homosexual content, is what this is saying, which is unfortunately too believable. And here's the part that interests me a lot here. I'm going to go through this part. I'm going to try to make this quick, but the film was not well received by contemporary critics of the time, who compared it unfavorably to the films of John Waters. I don't know exactly what to say about that, but and criticized the colorful production design. The lead actors were praised for their performances, but some of the characters were described as stereotypical. The film has since developed a cult following. I want to go into more of that. Let me see here. Critical response. At the time of its initial release, it polarized critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an approval rating of 42% from 90 reviews, with the consensus stating, and as always, obviously take Rotten Tomatoes with a grain of salt, form your own opinions, but the consensus states, too broad to make any real statements, but I'm a Cheerleader isn't as sharp as it should be, but a charming cast and surprisingly emotional center may bring enough pep for viewers looking for a light social satire. On Metacritic, it has a weighted average score of 39 out of 100, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Let's actually find some actual thoughts here. Elvis Mitchell of the New York Times praised Leone and Duvall, the main two, for their performances. Kevin Thomas of the LA Times described the movie as having jaunty, superficial humor that tends more to confirm homosexual stereotypes for easy laughter than to skewer the horror of conversion therapy. Emmanuel Levy of Variety described it as a shallow, only mildly entertaining satire. Reviews from gay media, though, were positive, and the film has undergone a critical reassessment over time. After Ellen.com named it one of the 5 best lesbian movies ever made, the site has considered the movie's story predictable and the characters stereotypical in its initial 2006 review. Curve called the film an incredible comedy that redefined lesbian film. So, all of this to say, what is my thoughts on this? Where would I put this? And I'm going to say that I think the idea of like saying that this is one of the best gay films of all time, or specifically lesbian films of all time, from what I've seen, which admittedly is not a lot, I think that might be hyperbole. It might be a little much to say something like that. Um, but that being said, I think this was great. Like, could it have been a lot more sharp, I guess is the word they use, with the conversion therapy stuff? Oh, yeah, definitely. It was definitely a lot lighter than it would really be. Definitely a lot less, like, frightening, but it still got the point across. And again, this is basically a satire. So, like like complaints about like the set design and colors and everything, and the costume design and stuff like that, doesn't really make a lot of sense to me when that's literally the point. And that was very obvious that that was literally the point. It's not like it's something that you couldn't read into. That was blatant. Calling this a comedy though does confuse me a little. I didn't read this as a comedy. A satire, yes, but there is a difference. Satire and comedy can go together, but I don't think this is a comedic movie. It's a romance. I would consider this a romance or even a drama more than a comedy. Drama though is pushing it a little much. But there's some like comedic aspects to it, but I wouldn't consider it a comedic movie overall. I'm kind of wondering though what stuff was cut to get it the R rating. I'm assuming probably like the sex scene was cut down a little bit, stuff like that. Um, Maybe there was something that like confirmed more characters, like maybe RuPaul's character Mike, I believe. Maybe he did get with Rock in the end originally, but they had to cut that out because just can't have too much of the gay. And they're already like rating it based on that in the first place, which is fucking stupid. Um, but it's like I just genuinely kind of wonder like what the like unedited version would have been like. Um, but the fact that this has gained a massive cult following, and since its original release, it has gotten a lot more attention from the queer community, and it's become a much more beloved film in that regard. I actually really like that. Um, and apparently, I was reading up on some other stuff. Apparently, the main actresses, Natasha Lyonne and Clea Duvall, are still friends to this day. They're like best friends. They're really close. And I think I read that they did one or two other movies together as well. Um, and Duvall specifically, who played Graham, is an out lesbian. And the thing is, she came out only in 2016, which means she was closeted when making this film. And in fact, what I'm reading here is it specifically says she was very closeted. And that's really sad that you're, and not, I'm not as an insult to her. I'm just saying it's sad. It's actually like depressing to know that she was making this film, this like queer love story, while being closeted, while being afraid to come out herself. And she probably excused it many times with saying like, oh, it's an acting job and stuff. That's really sad. I'm glad that she's out now. I'm glad that she's able to be out, and yeah, it's really great that she's gotten past that she's gotten through that. I'm happy for her. Um, it's great. I couldn't find anything if Natasha Lyonne is queer as well. I did see that she apparently dated Fred Armisen for a time, but I couldn't see anything. Though apparently is known for Orange is the New Black, and I haven't seen any of that, but I have heard that it is actually pretty queer. that the series is actually pretty queer. So maybe she is. Maybe she's like bi or pan or whatnot. It's possible. It's very possible. And obviously you have RuPaul in this. It's like, yeah, it's like, even though I personally don't like him because of the entire transphobic stuff, it's like you can't necessarily argue that he is an icon in the gay community as much as I wish he wasn't. But, people are just going to push that transphobia under the rug because, oh, he's changed now. It's like, yeah, he changed when he was called out and because he was called out. He literally made an adjustment because he was called out. It was very blatantly not genuine. But people want their drag race, so they're just going to ignore that. I don't know about any of the others who are in this, though. Um, like what their like connections to all of that is and everything. Let me see if I can find anything here. Not necessarily seeing anything. Dante Bosco, I believe, is straight, but he has shown support for the queer community in the past. I know that for sure. Um, Now, one thing I do want to touch on real quick, though, is there's some things that were just kind of left a little unanswered in this. And I want to see if, like, this actually touches on this. Let me see. Because I mean, obviously, I mentioned the entire thing with the fact that it's very clear that Mike had a thing for Rock. That was very clear. And it even very much implied that Rock had the thing for Mike as well. But nothing ever came of that. It never went anywhere, unfortunately. So there's one other thing I wanted to check regarding that. I'm trying to see if it's in here at all. I feel like it's probably not. Da, 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 da. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything regarding it. I can possibly look something up, though. Because there was one character in there, I mentioned it during the reaction, everything. I was wondering if, like, could this character be trans? But there was nothing that ever confirmed or denied it. But I'm a cheerleader. Okay, so I'm seeing some things here, and here's something from Screen Rant. Jan is clearly coded as a transgender male rather than a lesbian woman. As the character's monologue about not being like the rest of the camp. Hold on, let me bring up the full thing here. Because this is like from an article on Screen Rant about recasting if it were made today and all. Like who they would cast. Dove Cameron for Megan. Okay. Barbie Ferreira for Graham. I don't know who that is offhand. Let me just try to find the right character here. Here we go. The character Jan has one of the most interesting storylines in But I'm a Cheerleader. Jan is clearly coded as a transgender male rather than a lesbian woman, as the character's monologue about not being like the rest of the camp's participants and the character design suggests. If the film were made today, Jan would undoubtedly be canonically transmasculine instead of the identity just being heavily implied. For this reason, the OA and Star Trek Discovery actor Ian Alexander would be great for the role, sure. Alexander is one of the prominent non-binary actors of today, playing trans roles as a trans person himself. Their open gender fluidity would add much needed depth to Jan's character. Yeah, I think that would work. So yeah, it does seem like even other people agree that Jan was supposed to be like coded as a trans man. Maybe that was one of the things that was cut because like the gay stuff as it was even back in that time just not really super well accepted. And so like trans stuff, it's like, oh no, that very much has not been like super well accepted even back in like 99 2000. Um oh, apparently Elliot Page says that the movie changed his life. That's cool. I want to check something here. I wanted to see if I could find anything about whether or not Natasha Lyonne is actually gay, and I'm not seeing anything that confirms it, but I'm seeing a lot about her being a huge ally and like, okay, hold on, here's something here. Natasha Lyonne is straight every time they see her and then find themselves irrationally angry about it. So she's basically seen as like an honorary member of the community for being like a icon throughout this movie and everything and being a great ally and all. Apparently, she's played multiple queer characters according to this. So she's just like a huge ally. Okay. But yeah, I really I did really like this because, like I said, while it could have been more scathing and everything, let's be honest. Back in that time, it was probably hard to get this movie made as in the first place. It's just like, yeah, I mean, they had troubles with the ratings. I mean, come on, just because it was a queer film, and they had to cut out stuff and probably just couldn't go as deep into a lot of things as they wanted. But they did they did their best. And I did really appreciate that. The love story feels pretty natural. Megan and Graham's love comes across as very natural, and the fact that it has a super happy ending, despite both of them basically being disowned by their families and having to live on their own. It's like obviously you are upset by them having to go through that, but at the same time it's better than living a lie just to stay with their bigoted families. So you're happy that they have embraced their truth. And you see that it happens with other characters too. You see that Dolph embraces his truth, even clearly getting together with Clayton in the end. It's even if you don't like see any confirmation between like Mike and Rock, it's like there's a lot still there, and the characters are likable. The journey feels real too. As someone who, prior to coming out, was closeted for a bit, it does speak to me. Like, and the thing is, you could technically say I was closeted for most of my life, but it's like I came out as trans really quickly after Discovery, and I spent almost an entire year thinking about it. But once I really came to terms with it and accepted that yes, I am a girl, I came out almost right away. Like within that month, I was out to everyone, and I definitely regret it. I wish I had taken it a little slower admittedly. Just giving it time to breathe before I actually went there. But I wanted to be out as myself, and honestly, I'm glad I came out. It's just I wish I had paced it out a little better. But when I first came out as like just queer in general, like I originally came out as bi. I first came out as bisexual. Then I eventually started to believe I was asexual and biromantic because of a lot of trauma from my past. I've talked about that before on how trauma from my past with churches and stuff made me think that sex was something to be ashamed of, and so I believed myself to be asexual because I was basically afraid of embracing sexuality and all. Um, but either way. And then eventually I came out as pan romantic instead of bi, and then it just went it straight into or pansexual. That's when I dropped the asexual part, and finally just you know dipped out of that trauma as best I could. But when I first came out as bi, like when I first basically started to admit that and at the time I wasn't out as trans, so when I started to admit that I liked guys at that time, because I believed myself to be a guy at that time, as well as girls, it's like I was scared to admit that. And again, I was basically causing my entire life, because looking back on it, I knew my entire life. I just didn't want to admit it. I kept pushing it away into the back of my mind and stuff. But it's like when I first like came out, it had been a while after really like coming to terms with and accepting myself as bi. Like probably a couple years. I had known I was bi well before, but I didn't want to come out because I was scared to. And I also had this inkling feeling because of how I was raised and shit. Like, what if I'm wrong? I didn't want to believe it. I kept pushing it back. And so it's like seeing Megan in this, like not even kind of realize. It's like, yeah, I was there at a point, like before I realized, I was like, I looking back on it, oh, it's very obvious. And that's what happened with Megan. When she realized and she looked back on all the little clues here and there, she realized it's like, oh yeah, I like girls. It's very obvious now. I understand it now. She just didn't in the moment. She was brainwashed basically by her religious parents and all, which again, is something I can connect to. And just like her, like when I realized it, when I came to terms with it and accepted it, even before I came out publicly about it, I looked back on my life and it's like, oh shit, yeah, this was always the case. And it's like one of my first anime crushes, for example, when I was growing up, was James from Pokemon, and I never like fully put that together until after I realized I was bi at the time. But once I realized, and again, once I came to terms with it and looked back and realized that I had always been like that, it's like I'm like, oh shit, I had a crush on him. That wasn't like just a fascination or anything. I liked him. And it grew from there as I discovered more about myself, like coming out as pan and then like as trans and everything, and then getting rid of the asexual tag because I realized that was trauma speaking for me personally. And I say that because anyone who is asexual, that's perfectly valid. I'm just saying for my personal experience, it was based on trauma. But yeah, it was this movie, because of that, like it did speak to me a lot. And while there was nothing in this like that made me cry or that got me like vitriolically angry or anything, there were things that were annoying the shit out of me. And I think that was very clear with a lot of the pausing and a lot of like my reactions to certain things they were saying or whatnot, the gender roles especially. It's like, Jesus. But it's like, while it's obviously satirizing and exaggerating a lot of things, there's a lot of truth in all of this, especially with how people who are against us act and react about homosexuality and queerness in general. a lot of the gender roles, there are still people who try to enforce that idea. There are still people who think that women, quote unquote, acting like men is why there's a, again, quote unquote, plague of queerness. And it's like, that's that's honestly fucking stupid, for one. For two, it's like that's not how that even works. Like, you can't convert someone to be gay by having them be more into stereotypically masculine stuff over feminine stuff if you're a girl, or vice versa if you're a guy, or whatever. It's like, this is not how it works. Not how anything works. It's like, but there are people who believe that shit. And there are people who think it's just mental delusion and stuff, and it's like, it's just a lot to deal with. And there's a lot of issues that go into facing down these kinds of problems when you're dealing with bigoted family and whatnot. And the idea of parents like cutting you off and even like not letting you come back home and stuff is unfortunately very real. I've heard so many horror stories of that happening. Luckily, my parents aren't that bad. Luckily. But I also have no idea what would have happened if I had came out while I was, underage. Because I didn't come out until I was an adult. Because of how I was raised and brainwashed and everything. It's just, there's a lot to deal with that you could probably write an entire novel on just the shit I went through while trying to figure out myself and growing as a person through that, and my experience accepting myself as queer. But there's libraries you could write on the experience as a whole, from all the different perspectives and situations and like just people around the world who have gone through this. It's like there's so much that can be said that it's impossible to talk about it all in this video. I can only really give a couple perspectives, my own being the main one, and then others that I've read about or heard about. But I understood what this movie was trying to do. It was trying to be a satire. It was trying to poke fun while also spreading a genuine message and giving a genuine, happy, just beautiful love story as well. It was wild to experience, wild to watch, and there's a lot to deal with watching it. But it was worth it. And it was definitely something I'm glad I saw because, like I said, I've never heard of this movie before it was requested here. So I didn't know at all what to expect from this. I didn't even know going into this that it was a queer film. So that was a very pleasant surprise. I'm just happy it ended up being a really good one, and that it ended up being something I can understand and connect to, something that something that really worked for me on pretty much every level. Again, it's not necessarily perfect. It's not the best movie I've seen. It's definitely not the best queer piece of media I've seen by any means. But it's definitely something worth talking about. It's definitely something worth seeing, and I'm glad I finally did. So thank you to Isabel for donating for this. And yeah, let me know your thoughts down below if you have seen this. If you have not watched it or just watching this as a review, basically, I would definitely suggest checking out the reaction in the link below. It's worth it. It's a really good movie. Um, Let me know your thoughts, and thank you so much for tuning in. For now, I'm Connie, and I'm signing off. See y'all next time.